were super competitive with each other in the studios, like who could make the best feature, who could make the most virals, who could make the most money. And game teams would actually like come in and brag to other game teams during product reviews. And, if somebody came in and were like, you guys only sent 100 million requests today, we sent 120 million. You're like, all right, let's go back to the drawing board. Let's figure out how do we get to 140.
Hey, and welcome back to the official YouTube channel for A16Z Games. My name is Lester, your host. Today, I'm so excited to share with you a conversation we had with Scott Koenigsberg, the Chief Product Officer over at Zynga. Scott has been at Zynga for nearly 14 years, overseeing game teams, product development, marketing. He worked on titles such as Farmville, Mafia Wars, Words with Friends, and has so much experience shipping games and building product teams and features. His wealth of insights and knowledge are really second to none. What started as a conversation on live ops quickly bloomed into how to build a great game team, how to build company culture, and the torch that Scott is currently carrying in building the future of Zynga. If you like this content, please do subscribe. It goes a long way. Leave a comment below if you like what you see, and we'll see you next time. Scott, nice to have you on. Josh was telling me that you might have had before Zynga, which, looking back at your history, it's like you're a decorated veteran at the company. I was like, what was Scott doing before that? And a little bird said maybe like commercial work, or you're some type of commercial star. What's going on with that?
Oh, Josh, I can't believe you pulled that up, huh? I did do a commercial for GoToMeeting way back in the day. GoToMeeting was one of the pre-Zoom, a lot of these other GoToMeetings was one of the first online kind of conferencing softwares and telecom softwares, less video, more teleconferencing. And I did do a meeting for them because I was working at a global offshore resourcing company, and we had such a good story around how we use their product. They asked me to do a commercial. Turns out you should always read the paperwork that you sign before, because it was in a warehouse where they made me bring my own wardrobe, and so I didn't think it was a big deal or anything. Turns out they ran it nonstop for a year. Like during playoff games, they on like pre-rolls in hotel TV things. They did an email campaign for it. And I think I got a bottle of wine and a summer sausage gift basket out of it, which was great. While I was working for that company, actually, our office was actually on the campus of EA in Redwood Shores. And I used to look out and see all these people like playing volleyball and like having these big concerts and like having all this incredible fun. I'm like, what do these people do for a living? I'm like, wow, they make games. I like games. Why don't I go make games? The company I was working for was also going through some stuff, and I was an early member of it. And I started playing games on Facebook, and like weird little games like Text Twist and kind of like, not these deep games, what was then became Mafia Wars and Farmville, but kind of the early games of Zynga and other companies. And I started connecting with friends, particularly like from college friends that I hadn't spoken to in years and years. I actually had one of my college fraternity brothers was an early founder at Zynga. I had also known Mark Pincus for a while. So I started talking to them a little bit, and I didn't know anything about making games. I knew about making products and kind of merchandising and consumer product stuff, but I'd never, I knew nothing about making games. And so I went in and I kind of asked my buddy, like, hey, who runs your business team? Like, let me talk to them. And I went in and basically said, hey, I think, this was the early days of Mafia Wars. And I was like, I think I could make Mafia Wars a lot more money. And here are the 10 things I would do in the game to make more money. And so that was sort of my foray into Zynga. I was focused. I was the first revenue PM at Zynga. And because my only focus was really making more money on Mafia Wars. And then I sort of learned from the other people at Zynga. It was interesting because those days of operating on Facebook Canvas, there was a large component of game making and game design, but there's also this incredible opportunity to optimize for the channel, right? And to optimize everything at a pace that I don't think had ever been capable in mobile, in any type of gaming, where we could run an experiment for 4 hours, get, millions of points of data and be like, okay, here's the next decision we should make. I mean, the dopamine that you got from doing these things, like to try to find like a winner, like after, running an experiment for 24 hours and be like, well, this is the best thing we can do. And all of a sudden now millions of people are interacting with it. Was unlike anything I had ever experienced in my career. It was just incredibly fulfilling and fun. But we worked really hard. I mean, we were working, 14, 18 hours a day, We were there at midnight at 1 o'clock in the morning because sometimes it was safer to do a release then. And, you know, but Zynga wasn't telling us we had to do it. We were doing it because it was so much fun. Like everybody there was just enjoying it so much, and you enjoyed the people that you worked with so much. So it wasn't just work. It was actually friendships and social. Like I was always, and Josh remember these days, but I was always incredibly impressed when I would hear about the fact that a bunch of 25 PMs from across Zynga had decided to go to Vegas for the weekend together. And I would get emails like from executives be like, "Did you organize this? Are you paying?" And I was like, "No, they like each other. They want to hang out together on the weekends." And I think that's always the sign of a really successful culture, is when the people at your office actually choose to spend their free time together as well. And so I think the combination of the fun we were having, the opportunity in front of us, like, you know, there was no boundary. You know, Pincus he invented this phrase called escape velocity. And admittedly, I don't know if I ever really knew what it meant, but I had the concept that it meant go big and go really fast. I don't know if he clearly knew what he meant, but it became ingrained in our culture, like so many other things, like Zynga Speed and Be Your Own CEO. And it set us up for success in a way that was so much fun, because we could do so much so quickly. And if you made a mistake, you could pull it back really quickly. That changed when we got to mobile. It was a lot harder to kind of undo, but that's where we leaned more into kind of experimentation around features and things like that. But it was just an incredibly exciting time to be part of an industry that didn't know what its future was, but as a result didn't have any boundaries. Like, we could try anything, we could do anything. There were really no bad ideas. It was exciting. And the culture of Zynga at that time was so, what we used to fondly refer to as co-opetition. Like, we were super competitive with each other in the studios. Like, who could make the best feature? Who could make the most virals? Who could make the most money? Like, all of these things, like, we look at KPIs and be like, okay, who did best across our games? And game teams would actually like come in and brag to other game teams during product reviews and things. And it was fun. Like, it was never done in a mean way, but, you know, if somebody came in and were like, "Hey, you guys only sent 100 million requests today. We sent 120 million. You're like, "All right, let's go back to the drawing board. Let's figure out how do we get to 140. We just shared everything. Like, there was we literally would share everything that everyone was doing, so that we didn't repeat each other's mistakes, and we always learned from each other. That helped sort of that, you know, collaboration and competition, or that co-opetition, helped us kind of drive to more success.
Was a lot of that early days success actual game making and, you know, tinkering, or was it like optimizing Facebook as a platform and just like really understanding social nature of humans and figuring out like, oh, well, people are interacting in this social way, let's just gamify it more? I'm curious, like, where the balance was between game making and social kind of engineering.
I think it was more on the optimization front. I think the people we were hiring at that time to be PMs at Zynga, and including myself, first of all, there weren't that many game makers out there in the world, right? Who weren't traditional console game makers. And we weren't making console games. We were making games that were free to play, that were meant to be played, you know, in 5 to 10 minute chunks throughout your day rather than 1 2-hour session. We were providing also experiences that were incredibly social. In a sense, you couldn't play a lot of our games if you didn't have friends in the game. When I say friends, I don't mean real friends. I mean Facebook friends who you'd never met before. You know, that Mafia Wars was famous for having the Add Me thread, which was thousands and tens of thousands of posts of Add Me to your Mafia, right? Farmville had the Lonely Cows, search to find this thing. And so we were, to your point, we spent as much time optimizing the channels that were available to us and the creatives and the features that would get people to share with other people as we probably did around game design, because the truth is the game design in many ways was less important than how you interacted with your friends in those games. And that's really what drove the long-term retention and the life cycle of those games, was the relationships you had with your friends. Nobody really wanted to play Farmville just by themselves. They wanted to play with their friends. And everybody would badmouth Zynga and how spammy our feeds were. But, Farmville at its peak, I think, had tens of millions of MAU, right? Yeah, I mean, I think at the peak, Cityville may have had 100 million MAU. So Farmville probably was even higher than that. So we had 100 million people a month playing a game. And that's a good portion of people. So, I mean, when it's like today when people tell you they don't play games, and then you look at their phone and they're playing match 3 games and they're playing Hypercat, you're like, you are a gamer. You're not sitting in front of a console, but people who play Words with Friends are gamers. Like, And so I think I consider everyone a gamer. And I think Facebook and what we did in web those days kind of, people didn't really think that they were playing a game. They thought they were having a social experience more so than the game. The game was the backdrop.
Totally agree. And I actually think that because we were making games for a bunch of people who didn't consider themselves necessarily gamers, it was really liberating from a design perspective. Yeah. You didn't necessarily have to follow all of the tropes from, classic game design. And so, my observation is Zynga took a bunch of liberties with game design because, there were millions, hundreds of millions of people who had never played games in a hardcore way before. Playing a game for the first time, you could do a whole bunch of new things with them. And so, and that ultimately was one of the reasons why I think the social gameplay was so powerful. If you don't come in with a prior on what a game is supposed to be, you get to sort of like experience the game for the first time and experience the fun of the game through other people. I mean, ultimately that's why games are fun, right? It's like playing with other people. And so hundreds of millions of people came into a game for the first time and found delight in playing with other people, sharing with them, cooperating with them. One of the most successful features in those early Facebook games was visiting somebody else's farm or visiting somebody else's city and just doing a one-click like help. And that person would get a notification saying, Scotty just visited your farm and helped you water a plant. And that was a really great moment. And then you would maybe message or text Scotty afterwards going, hey, thanks for helping with the farm. It was a magical time, I think, in games, despite it sort of maybe drawing some ire and ridicule from like, sweaty sort of like, traditional game makers. It was a beautiful thing, I think, to show games to a totally new population of people in a fun way.
Yeah, we knew we had some success when, we'd launch a feature and like Josh's anecdote, like when somebody would stand up and be like, I just put down this building. Somebody please go help me now. And you'd stand up in the studio and be like, you over there, go to my city right now and click on that building because I need help. And you're like, wow, we've really tapped into something. Now, where the game design really did become important, though, was in the economy design and understanding how do we mix all these economies and these currencies so that, people, obviously, we want to also have purchase behavior in our games. We also wanted people to retain. And that's where I think a lot of our design resources went to. It was less about these bigger feature designs. It was more about understanding behavior and designing the economies. And that's when we really started hiring a lot more designers into Zynga, was to help us understand this. And then the game started getting more complex, right? We started so simple. It was like do job, plow, plant, harvest. Then we started creating these much more intricate experiences. And in some ways, though, those experiences weren't right for the platform. They became right later for mobile, where we expected people to have deeper experiences, but they weren't necessarily right for the Facebook platform.
Wait, so backing up, is that kind of everything you're talking about? Was that the true inception of like standing up live ops teams, a live service game? Because prior to developing on Facebook Canvas, it was just like, you were getting DLC. It was kind of predating a little bit of most of the more popular free-to-play models. It was kind of like, this thing's living and growing, and let's keep on chalking up more features. Let's develop more games. Let's keep these things like living and breathing for a while. Like, would you say that's kind of correct? Like that's the inception of live ops?
Yeah, we had a mantra of, we had to have a bold beat calendar. We had to launch one bold beat a quarter. And we had also a live ops events cadence that we scheduled on a weekly basis. And so every Monday, for example, I knew we'd have a limited edition drop. On Wednesdays, we had old limited edition sales. On Fridays, we had this other, so we had a very clear cadence. And the goal was to always make sure our players knew the game was alive, right? Knew that we cared about the game. Because the second you stopped showing that love, players were aware of it and they'd move on to the next experience. Because there was no switching cost, right? And it was easy to find a new game, easy to find a new social graph. So in some cases, we introduced too new of an experience, which could actually hurt the game. And so there was a very fine balance of making sure we preserved the core gameplay, but also allowed people to continue over the years. And it's, what's crazy today is Farmville 2 Web, 10 years old, still is on Facebook Canvas. It's still there, and people are still playing, enjoying it, and we still have a team working on it because, we discovered that if you do great live ops, you can keep players engaged, and as long as you have an engaged player base, you should continue doing it and service their needs.
When creating the cadence, like one bold kind of beat a week, was that all just finger in the wind? Like that's kind of a loose structure to think about how to pressure teams to pump out stuff? Or was that actually guided by very clear metrics and signals that were like, okay, here's 7 days. If you're not sticky enough, like you're not doing a good job. Was that something you were learning?
I think we always had clear KPIs that we were constantly maintaining and watching. And we'd have a daily report that we would monitor. And if something was off, we'd see a red number instead of a green number. It's sort of the way we operated was if something was more than 10% off our goal, you had to figure out what was going on. Because there was obviously a lot of fluctuation in the space. There was changes on the platform. There was user acquisition strategy. There was a lot that could happen. But we had major kind of key metrics that were kind of our core KPIs. If those were off by more than 10%, somebody had to write a report and figure out what was going on. The bold beat cadence, 1 a quarter, was honestly, I don't think there was an art or there wasn't a science to it. It was more of we think that this is the right cadence. And it's something we even discussed today across our games. Because as games get older, 1 bold beat a quarter may be too much. Your players actually may not be able to consume that much newness in a game they've been playing for 10 years. And so you also then, your bold beat hit rate also may get lower over time because you're trying to do more innovative things. And it's harder sometimes to move some of those core metrics. So I think the 1 bold beat a quarter, it was great. It was a great guidepost to be like, we got to do something big each quarter. Let's plan on that from a development and production cycle. But we're going to have to do iterations every week. But let's make sure we get, at least one big thing out each quarter. And sometimes you had to plan that thing 6 months in advance, right? Because it could be a major dev effort. But it definitely was more, I would say, more art than science at that point.
I think too, the bold beats were a good forcing function for teams that were so used to optimizing. Because look, when you're running these free to play games, everything you do is an optimization. Like there's optimization opportunities everywhere, but you can also get stuck just doing these small optimizations. And so forcing the team to think about, all right, if we have to do one big thing every quarter, how do we do it and what do we aim for, is a good way to sort of like make sure that teams aren't just doing the little things. They're thinking about how do we make the player experience way better in big ways all of the time.
That's a great point. And that's actually a challenge of live ops is, as well as, the bold beats cause teams to make trade-offs, to be like, I can either do 20 iterative things or I can do 5 iterative things and one big thing. And players, like, you never grow a game by doing 20 iterations. You don't. It doesn't work. They cannibalize each other. And you get marginal results every time you do it. But it's easier to do those things because they're less risky and you know that some of them will work and they take less time. And so the bold beats were, as Jas rightfully said, is really a forcing function to make sure that we're at least striving to create that. And then over time, I think we learned how to mitigate the risk on some of those, right? How do we do more consumer insights earlier? How do we understand it? But if something didn't work, did we have live ops backlog that could make up for that gap? And that's where great teams are really successful, is when you're like, shit, our bold beat missed. It's not working. But great news is we have 4 other events that we haven't been running that we've been holding in our back pocket just in case. We had a mitigation plan and we're going to run those instead. And and at that point, it's not, again, obviously there are always financial results associated with these things. This is more about keeping players engaged, because you can never monetize a player if they're not in your game. So first is retention and engagement. And that was also a pretty big shift from the Canvas days to mobile, which was, we never talked, like on the Canvas days, we didn't talk about day 30 retention. That was so far in the future, we didn't even think about it. Now we talk about day 90, day 180, day 365 retention, because we had a platform we knew we could get back to people on Canvas. And also the funnel was so large and the acquisition costs were so low in comparison to mobile. And so now it's all about retention and engagement and monetization second.
You touched a little bit on you coming in, pounding the table and saying, I can make these games or this company more money. How did you have such conviction to pound the table and the confidence to say, like, hey, like, I'm the money man, hire me. This is something that I know I can succeed in.
I wish I could tell you it was like some genius on my part. It was just, the company was so new. It was so young. The people making these games were so young. And none of them were, for the most part, were not experienced at kind of traditional consumer marketing or consumer merchandising. And so, there were very easy things that I could see in the games. And I'm like, why would you, like, the first feature I did at Zynga, which, I told this story 1,000 times, is I moved the buy button on Mafia Wars from the bottom of the page to the top of the page. It's not rocket science. Like, where do you want, if you have a buy button on the top, it's easier for people to hit purchase. And it moved revenue by like 15%. And people were like, holy wow, what did you just do? That's crazy. But but it was also like I did a map of all the economy and all the items that were being bought at different price points, and people hadn't seen a graph before for the most part. So it was pretty low. It was early days, and it was really easy to experiment, and so we could make right decisions really quickly. Even in those days, Zynga had a very kind of prehistoric experimentation platform, but you could run a multivariate experiment and be like, okay, here's 10 price points across different user segments. Let's see what resonates the most based on a type of item. And nobody was focused just on that piece of it. So it was easy for me to come in and kind of make some of those recommendations. And then the other one was actually ads, kind of watch to earn and off, like the early inclination of watch to earn, which was offer wall. And so there were opportunities like that where I'm like, people will trade their money for time, because that was a previous startup I had been in where we were rewarding consumers for clicking on banner ads and things like that.
It's crazy because now mobile, right? It's like so many of these early like behaviors and functions just bled like immediately over into the mobile space. So it was almost like you were engineering and priming the pump for what was to come.
It was really just taking real world stuff and applying it to the games. Like the first time we ran a new buyer discount, people were like, "Oh my God, that's an amazing idea." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" I just got a fax, and I did. I had just gotten a fax from a cell phone carrier that said, "New customers get 10% off." And I'm like, "Why don't we do that in our game? That's a good idea." Or the Black Friday, remember when you used to get the flyer on Black Friday with all the sales? And I'm like, "Why don't we do that in our game? We'll discount a bunch of stuff for Black Friday like the consumer retailers do." And everybody's like, "Okay, let's do that."
This is actually one of the advantages of not having priors coming in. Is like, if you come from games, you might not think about this stuff. But if you come from outside games, you're willing to try a bunch of things that maybe haven't been tried in games yet. And, surprise, surprise, when something works in another industry, it'll often work in games.
Well, and it's like what we think about our games, right? If we see one thing that works in one game, there's a 95% chance that same mechanic, maybe in a different wrapper, is going to work in another game. Like the Battle Pass, right? Remember when the Battle Pass came out a couple of years ago and everybody was like, "Oh my God, but this is great." And now there's no game that doesn't have a Battle Pass. But a Battle Pass is really just the same quest system we used to have in a different wrapper, in a better wrapper, with a reward vector and a pay track. But it's no different. They're only, Bing Gordon always says this, there's like 20 mechanics in all of gaming. And that's all. And they've been done over and over again in different ways. But it was the same principle as taking real world stuff and applying to games.
That's really interesting. So I feel, and just talking with Josh, the speed of iteration, the speed of experimentation, the speed of optimization, almost probably to some degree chiseled out that, what could have been the 21st new game mechanic or the 20, like the 22nd. I don't even know how many you guys, probably soft patented while in the process of developing so many games. How did some of that change when early 2010s hit and the shift to mobile started? How did that affect kind of the way that you all operated? Can you paint for the viewers kind of like what that transition was like when shifting to mobile?
It certainly wasn't an easy transition, because all the things that we talked about, the speed, the ability to pull things back quickly, the beholden platform of having a sort of a captive audience on a platform that you can get to through channels within the game where your friends could send things to them very, very easily, where you can create UGC really easily. When we started transitioning to mobile, we lost all that, right? So we had to now design a game up front that was great from, like, on canvas. We could iterate, we could build over time, we could launch a game. We didn't have to do marketing. We could just build over time. We had viral channels. We could do cross promo. I could cross promote from Mafia Wars to Farmville, totally different audiences. But if I put enough incentive in Mafia Wars, people would just go check out Farmville and you'd see installs spike. And so we had this ability that we started to lose on mobile. So we had to be a lot more prescriptive and a lot more careful about what we made, how we made it. And it cost a lot more money to launch, right? And the channels that we had to get to retain and engage users were a lot less. We had push notifications, which are awesome. In the early days, we leveraged the Facebook graph on our games that were social. Social became much harder also. And we were a company that was all about social. And even today, social on mobile is often lacking. Whether it be Zynga games or other, like, we try to do a great job of social, but I always think we can do more than we're doing today on social. And some games do it better than others, but it's a key component if I told you I'm going to put a social leaderboard in a match 3 game 10 years ago, you go, "You're crazy. Why would anybody want that?" Now it's a key part of every match 3 experience. So the transition was difficult because of the fact that we had to be more confident in everything we were making, and it took longer to release, right? Now you have to go, when you're done with your QA process, right? First of all, it takes much more QA. There are many more different types of devices out there than there were. Instead of one platform, we had two platforms. We had an Android, and the Android platform has, at that time, dozens of devices, some of which worked well, some of which didn't. And so everything was different. And then you had to go through a submission process. And so you had to have a third party look at your stuff and go, okay, this is okay to release. Sometimes they would come back and say no. And then we had to develop new systems kind of for telemetry that we didn't have before. Buying was done through an app store. We didn't have control of all the price points. So it was a hard learning for us to understand, how do we do live ops? How do we launch new games in this new world? And it took years to kind of really figure it out, because it was so different from our core DNA. And when I said, about Facebook games, it was more about optimization than design. I think when we got to mobile, it actually had to be an equal part of both, maybe even more heavy on the design side, because you had to really, once somebody installed that game, you really had to engage them, because once they left, it was kind of hard to get them back because you didn't have as many channels to get them back. So now that's when we started focusing on day 30 retention. And it took some time when we started making mobile games to be like, well, what's the day 30 retention? People are like, well, we don't really look at that. The most we look at is day 14. You're like, well, we're losing users and we're paying for them. So we're paying a lot more for them. So now we need to look at this longer term retention. So it changed our design. It changed kind of the key metrics that we looked at. And then it also changed kind of the way we scaled and acquired users for the games. Because on the Canvas days, attribution didn't really fully exist, or you didn't really know the ROAS of a customer. There just wasn't that level of tracking. When we got to mobile, you better know your ROAS. You better know if this customer you're buying is profitable. Otherwise, you should stop spending your money there. So it changed also our entire infrastructure and the way we tested things. Josh, remember we now have Store Maven as part of Zynga, but remember we had an early version of kind of the fake app store where we test ads or test creatives. We test the icon and the name, and we created our own, not fake app store, but a place where we redirected users when they clicked on an ad to see what would pull in the most amount of installs. Store Maven eventually created that as their business, and when we acquired them last year. But it was the only tool we had for testing things. Whereas on the web, in early Mafia Wars days, the way we figured out what city to do next was we put up 10 cities on our travel menu and saw what people clicked on the most. That was our test. We're like, oh, everybody wants Cuba. All right, we'll do Cuba next. This is great.
I mean, that's a pretty big 180. That's design philosophy, channels that you market through, new infrastructure that you need to build, whether it be telemetry or anything else. That's a pretty ground up, many different things change at once kind of shift.
Yep.
Anytime we wanted to change the game, we had to then go resubmit it. And then, there'd be a couple of days where we'd have to wait for it to be approved. And so where on Facebook, we could just test something, and if it didn't work, we could just roll it back or whatever. It was hard to do that on mobile. If we screwed something up, as an example, it would be days potentially, unless we, called in a favor at Apple to, get it fixed. Or if we ran an experiment and needed to resolve something, it would be a couple of days. And so it forced us, I think, to be a lot more intentional about what we tested. We still went out there and tested a whole bunch.
Yeah, that was the word I was looking for, intentional. Yeah.
So yes, so you went from being able to do whatever you wanted all of the time to sort of having to have quality shots on goal, which was, a shift, but I think a good shift too.
Yeah, I think so too. It taught us, I think we were probably in the Canvas days a little cavalier about what we did. Because we had the cushion that we could roll it back or change it quickly. I mean, we used to, I always joke, we used to do, anywhere from 4 to 6 releases a week. And we always had what we called no release Friday, because we didn't want to have to do, triage over the weekend. And we do 2 releases on Friday instead of 3 or what, it was but on mobile, we can only do 1 release a month because of the QA time involved with all of the devices, with the release schedule, with the submission, the review process, and so it slowed us down dramatically. And we had to be much more intentional, like Josh said, because the downside was if we had a bad release out there, it could really negatively impact our player experience for a week or two before we were able to address it, not because of our own efforts, just because of the way the app stores worked at that point.
And I feel that the industry has kind of been still figuring out how to react and how to use different ways to A/B test and how to iterate faster around the big platforms for the past decade, would you say, like decade plus? Like it feels like that shift hasn't happened as much in the last, few 5, 6, 7 years, as much as that change from probably to a gaming company that was like web to mobile. Is that accurate to say? And we're like, everyone's still trying to figure out that right blend of how to iterate quicker, how to get better insights? Or do you even think that like companies have evolved past and figured out how to live and exist in this environment where there's still app stores, there's still probably like long, submission times and having a battle upwards through the powers that be?
I'd say we're pretty good now. We don't, the app stores, the submission processes and the review processes have gotten better. And, when we started this transition to mobile, first of all, there were no mobile experts, right? Nobody knew mobile gaming at all. So it's not like you could turn to your buddy at another company and be like, hey, so we are facing this problem. What should we do? And they'd be like, I don't know. Like, we just started this journey too. We're all learning together. So it was nice that we had the scale that we did at the time at Zynga. But I think we've also developed a relationship with the app stores. We kind of know what they're expecting. We know how to navigate them. We've developed the right relationships, and they're pretty transparent about their guidelines in all these things. So we're able to iterate pretty quickly. Like in a lot of cases, we can get down to 2-week build cycles and get releases out. It's a question of, how often do we want to put them out? And then most companies now have, or at least the large companies have, experimental backends where they can turn things on and off very easily. Everything is a DLC. You don't necessarily need a client build in order to get new content in the game. And so that, once everybody learned that we should be doing DLCs in the background instead of doing client releases, that made all of our lives easier. So when I wanted to launch a new event, I didn't have to do a new build. I could just, update the app or upload that data into the app without doing a new client build. And then we have on the back end, we have the ability to run experiments, which also control our live ops and our events and our merchandising in a very segmented manner. And I think that was the other big change that we made over as we moved to mobile, is that not all players are created equal. And that we had to get a lot smarter about segmentation and about who we showed which content, how we onboarded them. And that also can vary by acquisition source. And so we got a lot smarter. Obviously, I think the amount of data that we got, machine learning and kind of data analytics allowed us to do a lot more than we were ever able to do as humans. Like when Josh and I started, everything was done manually. Like you'd run an experiment, you'd dump all the results to Excel, and you'd run pivot tables and then create graphs and charts and be like, what's going on? Now that's all done by the machines. And it's awesome. Like it tells you what the winning experiment is. Was it statistically significant? Yes or no? Like was there any variance? Was there any bias in the population, et cetera, et cetera? Whereas that stuff that used to take us days, if not, sometimes a week to do analysis on, now we get that when the experiment's over and we can look at it live. And so that evolution has also allowed us to spend time on harder problems, right? About how do we create the right roadmap. And also we have games now that are 10, 12, 15 years old in mobile. And, the player who's been playing Zynga poker for 15 years is maybe very different than the new install who comes in tomorrow. And so how do we make sure that we have the right experience for those two players? If it's the same experience, they both want the same thing, great. But that's not always the case. And so the older your game gets, the harder it becomes to make sure that you're segmenting your data. And, Josh worked on Words at Zynga, and Words is a classic game where there are players in the game who just want solo PvP, or classic PvP. They just want the Words of friends they grew up with, and they don't want any changes. And that's great. But we've introduced a ton of new features in that game because there's also a population who wants to do a lot of other things, as evidenced by other games in the market. And so how do we provide the right experience to our classic players, as well as the people who want to do other things? We have people who just want to do solo challenge. Great. We should allow them to just do solo challenge without penalizing them. And so you start to think about the evolved thinking is, how do I provide the right experience for the right archetype? And so we started developing archetypes for players in our games and understanding how they want to play and try to, use, we're not quite at the state of personalization, but I think we'll get there where your experience and my experience may be very different based on how I play. Like if you only play 4 days a week and that's the max you can play my game, I shouldn't push you to play 5 days a week because you've told me by your patterns you only want to play 4. There are other people who want to play 7 and we should celebrate them and let them play 7 days a week. But you as a 4-day-a-week player should feel the same benefits and feel like you're not being hampered because you're not putting in those extra 3 days. And that's a hard problem to solve. And I don't think we would be able to solve it if we didn't have the data analytics capabilities that we have today, as well as the experimentation platforms to understand it. Because you can, we can make we can hypothesize about how the 4-day-a-week player, what they might want, but it's easier if we just give them the options and then look at the data.
Scotty, something you said earlier reminded me. I remember when the central tech group at Zynga first came out with this feature called RoboPM. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
RoboPM was basically the first attempt to automate a lot of the sort of things that PMs did. And I remember all the PMs got together and were like, "Oh my gosh, are we going to be out of a job?" Thankfully, all of those automation tools came along, and PMs still have jobs, so it's good.
It turns out that you can't just do things because you have data. You actually have to have a hypothesis and then prove it right or wrong, and then use your instinct of how to do it, right? And that's why we still have jobs, because all the data tells us is which direction we should be going, but you still have to figure out the implementation, and the implementation is really the art of it, and it's the hardest part. And that's where the combination of a PM and a designer can really make a difference. Where a PM might necessarily be able to do it all himself. It's how do you communicate it to the player? How do you merchandise it to the player? How do you tell them it's valuable? Like, we've put features in our games and haven't told players why it's a good feature, why it's important. And you know what happens? They don't interact with it. And we go, wonder why the top of the funnel on this feature isn't working. We're like, well, look at the dialogue we put up for it. It was written by somebody who doesn't know how to speak to a consumer. And so there's that. That's where the real magic comes in on live ops.
So I actually think this is really powerful where, at Zynga, my observation was that, a team in live ops, the entire team understood the business and understood the metrics. Didn't matter if you were PM, analyst, engineer, artist, QA, didn't matter. Everyone understood. And so good ideas could come from anywhere because everyone sort of knew what the big priorities for the business were and what was working and what wasn't. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how that came to be, how it was. It's sort of like, as opposed to other places where maybe only the data team understands the metrics, how it came to be that at Zynga, everybody was responsible for knowing the business, because that's an incredibly powerful organizational tool.
And you're absolutely right. We have so many stories of, this feature came from this other person who's not responsible for making features. They thought they had a good idea. They had access to the data. And they looked at it and they were like, hey, we can move this metric that I've heard that I've heard the team talk about. So one of the things I think we've always prided ourselves at Zynga in terms of our product culture is we share everything. And we expose all the metrics to everyone. And so we run, product reviews and numbers reviews where we go through data at a very granular level, and everyone is invited to those meetings and everybody is encouraged to speak up and ask questions. And so that there's a broad-based understanding. And this is really the job of a product manager in general, is to set the vision for the team so that everybody knows what we're working against and how we're getting there and what success looks like. It's not necessarily their job to tell everybody how to get there, but as long as everybody can understand what success looks like, either from both a metrics and a customer experience situation, then everybody can contribute. And, we've tried crowdsourcing idea. You can't just have a backlog where everybody puts in an idea and then you go, okay, well, how are we going to size these or prioritize these? But if people can understand, hey, we have a day 30 retention problem that we're trying to move. Here are 10 features that we're thinking about, or here are experiments that we ran to try to fix that. And here are the results. But then somebody in the back of the room who, let's say is an analyst or an engineer goes, well, wait, have we tried this? Because my experience when I play the game is this, and I think this would be a good idea. That's where I think you get that's where the magic really happens. And that's a key part of live ops, is making sure that you have everybody on the team involved in kind of the vision and driving. But you have to have a unifying metric or vision or customer experience that you're trying to modify, and so that everybody's kind of rowing together.
Was there any big whoopsie, the intuition was off and it was not even 10% off? It was 30, 40, 50% off, 100% off. And I was like, oh, thought the players wanted this and we should roll it back. Or sometime when the intuition was just nope, that wasn't it.
Oh yeah. I'm not going to name them because I don't want to insult anybody who might have worked on those, put in a lot of effort, because I was also part of them and I take accountability for them. They were on games that I was on, part of the team or GM of, and we made some mistakes. The universal truth though that I learned across all the mistakes was we didn't do enough upfront testing and understanding what consumers want. We either saw something that was hot in the market and we tried to fast follow that by bringing that into one of our titles or replicating it in some way. Or we took a feature that we thought would work, but we didn't spend enough time asking our players if it's what they wanted. We did it for business reasons, not player reasons. And that is, I think, a recipe for failure. Like, because we know what can move the business metrics. And truth is, sometimes it's only short-lived. And you're, for the first week, you're like, wow, this is awesome. And then 3 weeks later, you're like, oh my God, this is destroying our game. We need to change this quickly. And so don't lead with business metrics. Make sure you test everything you can with your core audience and make sure which audience you're serving. Like, you want to serve your 80%, not your 20%, if you can. But sometimes you're going to launch things that serve the 20% because they represent a large portion of your business because your game is older and that's where a lot of your metrics are coming from.
I love that.
So it would be know your customer and don't lead with business metrics. But yes, several big failures that were just frustrating. Because in some cases they were like the team thought they were fun. The team literally, like, we would play test these things and be like, this is awesome. How can players not like this? We're having a blast playing this together. You know the one I'm talking about, Josh.
Oh, I know.
I still love that. I still love that feature. And I'm still bummed that it didn't work. But the hardest part in that whole equation is walking away from the feature. Like, divesting yourself of and being like, this, we've tried now for 3 months to get this to work. And everybody always has a reason. First, the reason is always first top of the funnel. Like, we haven't expanded top of the funnel enough. We got to get more players into it. Then it'll be good. And then you get more players in and the data's not there. And you're like, well, the tuning's off. Let's try to go back and fix the tuning. And then, 3 months later, you're like, we've tried to keep making this feature better. It's not hitting the expectations we have. We should stop working on it. And that's a hard thing on a new game process, on a feature. It's probably one of the harder things of making games is knowing when to make that decision. And then, the best case scenario is when the team bottoms up, comes to you and goes, we should stop working on this feature. It doesn't happen that often.
In mobile, you sort of just have like one shot to get things right. Teams are reluctant, I think, and maybe, don't have the courage to go out there and like really try to bang their heads against the wall on something that's just like not showing itself to work. A lot of teams just, pack it up and try something else, and that's totally okay.
And I think we've also changed the culture such that I think it used to be people considered it penalizing to launch something and fail, or start a new game and not have it launch and fail. Whereas we now celebrate those things. We realize it is difficult to make mobile games. It's difficult to do live ops and expand. Some companies out there have done great jobs of it. And it's amazing to see how many mobile games have been out there for 5+ years. Nobody, I think, ever thought that would occur. But it's really hard work. But you are going to fail a lot along the way, and we celebrate those failures and we try to learn from them. Whereas back in the day, we used to, there were parameters for what metrics you had to hit to launch a game. And so what everybody did when they presented their new game idea? They basically put those parameters, said these are our targets and these are what we're going to hit, and that's and so we made those games. And over time, you're like, well, I think you're just putting that down because we told you that was the guideline. We don't have that culture anymore. Now it's how do we mitigate risk? How do we test early? How do we understand what the market works? We can change that dynamic. And even as it goes to live op development, like, we can experiment more. Let's get consumer feedback. Let's take risks, but let's take mitigated risks. And if they fail, that's okay. Let's at least, though, understand why they failed and apply that to something else. And so people who fail and learn are much more heroic than I think they used to be.
This was something that I thought Zynga did better than most other places I've worked at, which is this culture of learning. Scotty, I don't know if you can talk a little bit about sort of how that came to be, because you were there at the very, very start where, Zynga really focused on learning from each other and learning from the industry. I was just hoping you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we used to spend, and I can't take credit for this, but I think the early culture from the early days of Pincus and Scheimeyer and that crew were one of always be benchmarking, right? Always be looking at what the market is doing, what your competition is doing, always understand what good looks like. And so there was always a push for us to, we have a mantra thing, which is proven better new. And you don't get to do better until you've done proven well. You don't get to do better until you don't get to do new until you've done better well. And so don't just jump to new, because chances are you're going to fail. And we talk about it in terms of features like, a day 7 retention calendar. Like, if you haven't gotten that right yet, you can't move on to the next innovation that you're looking and go into that innovation death zone, because there are certain things that you should always have in every game. And that was part of that was driven top down, but then we created forums really, and this was the initiation of kind of the product council and PM lunches at Zynga, which was every week we had a PM lunch, and 2 to 3 people would present what they did in their games that week, what experiments they ran, what they had tried that was new, what they tried that new was failed. And we did it actually on a weekly basis. And it was this, we also served amazing food, which made everybody want, and we already had amazing food. But these lunches, like, we didn't have our culinary staff food. We had like restaurant food, which was from like great restaurants in San Francisco. So you'd have 100 people show up at these things. And it was this really big collaborative event where it became cool to share information, and it became cool to share when you failed and what you learned. And that really, it's a great point, Josh. I hadn't thought of that, but it really did set the tone for Zynga in those days. To have that, we call it now, a teaching hospital, right? Where I want everybody to come to everybody's product review and ask really hard questions. Not hard questions to look like they're smart, but to ask questions if they don't understand something, they see opportunities. And it became like, we all have enough meetings here in life. But when you see people start opting in to go to these meetings with 50 other people on somebody else's product, you know that you're doing something right. And I think as we've acquired new studios into Zynga, it's one of the things I've been most proud of is all the learnings we've been able to share with them, whether it be on battle passes or retention plays or merchandise. Like when they come and they see what we, our playbooks or our wiki, they're like, holy shit, this is a lot of great information. I'm glad you have this because now we don't have to repeat this. And once you get to a scale of a portfolio, if I don't know how many games we have, but let's say 30 or 40 or 50, whatever number of games we have, you multiply that by the number of features and experiments that are going on, you start to gather a lot of data, and you can prevent people from making the same mistakes that somebody else has made. So you can start to move more rapidly and iterate and experiment and evolve the games much more quickly.
I have always thought of a stint at Zynga being like a PhD crash course in live ops. Like, when you look at the games industry, when I look at a PM, I tend to think instead of years of experience in terms of reps. How many feature launches have you done? How many game launches have you done? And so on Facebook and on mobile, you can actually get a lot more feature launches and game launches than you can on console or PC necessarily. And so somebody with just a couple of years of experience on mobile might have done just as much as somebody who spent a decade or whatever in slower moving industries. And then at Zynga, you sort of like, you take that and it becomes a multiplying force, right? Because suddenly not only are you doing your own reps, you're learning from other people's reps in a very, very high quality manner all of the time. And so suddenly, instead of 1 year of experience, you get the benefit of having like 80% of 50 other people's years of experience all at once.
I'm curious, Scotty, like as you've taken so many more studios in, as you continue to build your legacy at the company, is there anything that you've created with small teams, big teams, kind of like cultural ways that you've kind of shifted the mentality of how an early PM is thought or how teams interact? Like, is there something you can impart and take the torch and move it forward that you can kind of recall?
One of the things that is important, obviously, as a company that makes games, is that we want to talk about games. We want to play games. We want it to be part of our culture. We have PMs do case studies on other games to show how they might analyze and deconstruct another game. We generally do that for newer PMs, and we try not to provide them a lot of help. And it's hey, go check out this game and then tell us what you like, what's good, deconstruct it for us, and then tell us how we learn from it. What should they do differently? What should we, And so one of the keys is creating a culture of games. If you're a game maker, and having your teams love playing games, talk about them, and celebrate what other people have done well. It's, we're an industry that certainly learns from each other. And when I see a game come out and do really well, I'm very happy for that game because it's all boats rise together. I want us to all be successful. And it's important, especially, in an industry that it's, last year has been difficult in many ways. There have been a lot of changes in the industry as it relates to privacy. Mobile gaming has become, in some ways, more difficult, but it's also become easier in some ways because we're able to engage players more and we have more tools to engage players. So there's a balance there, but we want to certainly celebrate great games out there. We want people to talk about them. The other piece is be part of a learning culture and a hypothesis driven. I want our PMs to come in and I want them to have strong opinions. and then go prove their opinions right or wrong. And to recognize that it's okay to be wrong, but it's wrong to not express your opinion. We don't need people who are just simply taking orders and kind of writing. Like, we want people to, whether it be an engineer, an analyst, a designer, or an artist, like somebody who goes, hey, I'm working on this game. I feel passionately about this. I want to talk about it. I'm willing to write a one-pager to try to get my idea out there and try to get my idea in the game. And so it's creating that culture of hypothesis-driven analysis, and then everybody's a collaborator. Everybody can be a creator. Everybody has a say in what we're doing. And I think if you combine kind of the love of games and the two other factors, I think you start to build a culture of teamwork that gets you through the hard times and gets you kind of to the good times. And then obviously celebrating when you do have wins. And then recognizing when things have failed, and then communicating what those failures are very openly and honestly. I think one of the big tenets of Zynga's culture for a long time has always been intellectual honesty. And, Josh and I have had this discussion many times, but I can't stand when people aren't intellectually honest. Like, it's so discouraging when, somebody's telling you one thing and you know it to be different, and they're doing it for their own benefit. Like, our jobs as product managers is to raise the team and remove hurdles for the rest of the team. It's not to be a hero. It's not for our own ego. Like, our success should always be the success of the product, nothing else. And if the product isn't successful, it doesn't mean you can't be successful, because sometimes things go wrong and things don't work. But as long as, again, you've learned from those things, you communicate to others what not to do, then you're successful. And I think if we can instill those values into new people who join Zynga, I think we'll continue to be in a good place and operate really successfully. And I think, it's been fun. We just went through a major transition with Take-Two. It's been a really positive transition. We've been learning a lot from each other, and I'm just more bullish on kind of the mobile games industry than I've been in. I continue to get more and more optimistic about where we're headed, because I'm seeing the games that are coming out. I'm seeing how consumers are reacting to them. And I just think there's a long path for mobile gaming. It's not going anywhere.
Let's talk about that. Like, what's getting you excited right now? Like, in the spirit of loving games and talking about games, like, with that optimism, what is piquing, your interest in what's exciting to you right now in the mobile space or general gaming space?
No, I mean, look, I'm excited to see. I'm excited by the transformation to cross-platform in many ways, right? Mm-hmm. It's exciting to have games that are going to cross, like, I can play anywhere, and that people and the experience. And some people have done amazing jobs of porting what we traditionally consider console games over to mobile games, and that shows me that there's an appetite for all types of games on all types of mediums. And I play a large mix of console games. I play a large mix of mobile games, but I'm excited to see how diverse, like, the fact that the industry continues to come up with new and diverse experiences. Over the last 2 or 3 years, there have been some really groundbreaking games that have come into the market that I don't think anybody really expected to be as successful as they were. And they're really beautiful games, and they're games that you wouldn't have expected to be so successful on mobile. And I think that's showing us that we can create bigger and better and deeper experiences on mobile than we thought possible. But there's also this appetite for hyper-casual. And, hyper-casual is evolving into a different space where we're seeing games that are bringing in meta into their games. They're extending the retention curves. And they're becoming these really great funnel experiences. And what's really cool about hyper-casual is hyper-casual is a gateway into other casual games. Somebody who's never played a game might install a quick hyper-casual game, play it for 10 minutes, and then go, oh, wow, you know what? I'm going to try this other game that I just saw an ad for. So it's a way to get people into gaming. It also provides, bite-sized experiences, but that we're evolving that market as well. And then if you look at the casual games market, there's certainly been a lot of consolidation, but games are now evolving at a different pace than they were 2 years ago. And in some ways that's driven by kind of the challenges in user acquisition and privacy and things like that, where we need longer retention curves. We need to maintain users. But I think, the games are a constantly evolving industry. And we're starting to see more evolution occur more rapidly than I think we saw 2 years ago. Because some of that, there were a lot of people engaged while they were locked in their homes during COVID.
Scotty, one of the things I'm also excited about is sort of like a cross-platform with mobile. What are some of the mechanics that you think traditional mobile gamers are now ready for that they maybe weren't before? And maybe, any learnings that you guys have from trying to go from mobile to cross-platform? Because, I've observed PC and console, traditional PC and console developers try to go mobile. It's really, really hard. And so
it's really hard. Yeah.
It'd be helpful to hear, the perspective of a mobile developer that's trying to go sort of out to PC and console as well.
Yeah, I think there's, and we're still learning. We haven't launched our first cross-platform game yet. We're still working it, but obviously there's the control schema, right? And that's one of the big challenges as you go from mobile to console or console to mobile. And so what works on one platform may not work on the other. And certainly if you have a game that involves any nature of PvP, you want to have parity with the platforms that it can do. And that's hard to do. You also want to provide as rich an experience on mobile as you do on console, right? And so we think about, high fidelity games and how do we do that in a way that's that we preserve the experience. But we also have to be mindful that you can't always preserve the experience. So how do you optimize it for the right experience for the player for that platform? And then, you have other things like, progression mechanics, right? Or purchasing behavior, which is very different. Rewarded video is a very big part of mobile gaming. It's not that big a part of console gaming yet. And so how do you provide the same progression mechanisms for the people who play on mobile as you do on a console game? And so we're working through kind of all those things now, and a lot of that will come down to experimentation. We're going to look at, obviously what other people have done in the industry. So those, right now I'd say those are the main challenges we're facing. Look, I think Call of Duty did an amazing job of providing what felt like a mobile first experience for a game that was traditionally a console game. But it was a very different game than you would play on the console, to their credit. And they did it, they simplified the control scheme and it worked really well. There have been other things that haven't been as successful. Like Diablo was, from a gameplay experience, was super successful, had other challenges. Apex has obviously had some challenges in going to mobile. And each one of those cases is very different, right? There's no playbook yet of going from mobile to console or console to mobile. And so we're starting to invent that playbook, and some of it we'll learn as we go along. I think we've addressed a lot of it. We have some really talented people. It really helps now that we, are part of Take-Two now, and we can rely on their console experience to help us do a lot of the things that we're doing. But we have some really, we have a blend of really strong console developers and mobile developers who are tackling this problem. The good news is mobile does provide us the ability to experiment, I think, more quickly in many ways than console might, or at least we know how to do it really well. So I believe we'll get a lot of the tuning right and get a lot of that right. And obviously we're already used to doing live ops, but it's been really interesting to me how the console world has now pivoted over the last couple of years to doing live ops, and it's all DLCs. And when you play any game, it's like, holy shit, look at all the stuff in this game. Look at all the stuff I can download. It doesn't quite feel the same though as doing live ops in mobile, because you actually have to go download it, right? You have to actively go do it. And it's not always the same as a new event that you might get. And so I think if we can bring some of our mobile playbook learnings into the console world about how we do live ops in particular, but how do we do events, how do we have the right cadence without people necessarily doing a download, that would be interesting to me.
What is your idea of like a perfect team right now in 2023 of like a games team combined with a live ops team, or should they be like integrated? Like, how do you think those teams should work? Because I think to a lot of the examples you just called out, sometimes it feels like, was that a live ops miss, or was that a game design choice that maybe was too influenced by the live ops decisions, or vice versa? Like, how do you think about perfectly orchestrated or built kind of teams in this day and age right now?
It's interesting. I think it depends on the genre and the composition of the team. I don't think there's one right answer. We've had teams in the past where we've had a revenue pod, or we've had an engagement pod, or sometimes that works. I think overall, though, teams are becoming smaller in size overall as we get better at live ops and we have better tooling. I think you're going to have more teams that are less specialized and more generalized and all focused on live ops. Like, can you have a unified roadmap across 4 different pods where people know they're working on certain sections of the game, but you're not having just live ops? Because also people get burned out. If you're just on live ops, it can get pretty grindy over time. And it's not, and what's funny is everybody always wants to work on new. Everybody. Like, if you're in a live game team, everybody's like, I want to go work on a new game, until you start to work on a new game. You're like, wow, this is really, really hard. Doing live ops was so much easier. And actually sometimes more fulfilling, because you're getting instantaneous feedback of, did I do something good or bad? Is it resonating with players? So I think making sure your team has the right mix of experiences where they feel like they're working on new in the existing product. So they're getting that ability to be more creative and not just grind, but having that right mix. And so I generally say keep it keep it all as, one team working against different goals, but shifting responsibilities as you go through the life cycle.
I think everything you said has so much more weight too, just given your background and everything you have gone through and experienced and shipped. Like to be able to say that and still be, be in the position that you are and overseeing so many different projects, so many different ups and downs, I think is incredibly carries with it so much power and weight that I am in full kind of evolving awe of everything that you've done and kind of the observations you've made in the industry.
I mean, again, we're still learning. We are learning every day. And that's the nice thing about our space is, when Josh and I were at Zynga together 8 years ago, it was such a different world than today where we are in the mobile ecosystem, the games that are being made and the crossover between, PC, console, PC and mobile. But the thinking is basically the same. It's how we're operationalizing it has changed, and the way we approach it. We do have so much more data and so many more tools available to us. And in general, when we used to have to recruit a mobile game PM, it didn't exist. There was nobody who had mobile gaming experience. And now there's, I can call on Josh, I can call on other colleagues that I've worked with who have had mobile gaming experience, be like, hey, we're dealing with this. How did you guys think about this when you dealt with it? And so we are able to move the entire industry together more quickly and make it more successful and bring the right games. And the nice thing about mobile gaming that I found is that people are pretty collaborative. Everybody does enjoy sharing. It's not everybody. I think most people want other gaming companies and friends at gaming to be successful. We can all be successful together because people play many games. And so there's a lot of sharing and collaboration that goes on, which is, I think, very different from many other industries.
I thought, touching earlier about the 20 mechanics of I keep on thinking about this now that you've said it, I can't get it out of my head, that all games are built on the same 20 mechanics. And I feel that even unbeknownst to me, I thought the battle pass was some crazy innovation and maybe it was just dressed up better to the end user, or I guess a limited time event or some seasonal event. Yeah. It feels like it's all there in consumer behavior, maybe within games or outside, oftentimes probably outside of games. You took from retail, you took from just different, parts and just digitized it.
I mean, you can go back to the Pogo sticker book, right? Of a collection, one of the first collection mechanics, play all these games, get stickers, complete your book. I mean, we've used that collection mechanic in gaming for the last 25 years, right? Or 20 years of collect all these things, get a reward at the end, and now you have a book and you can celebrate all the things you've collected. And it's applied to RPG games, it's applied to shooters, it's applied, all these things. But the battle pass, again, I don't even know what the first battle pass was, or if we were to go back and say official battle pass, and I celebrate the team that put that in. But it was not very different from the quest systems we used to have, or that WoW had. It's not that different from the quest system of WoW. It's just better packaged and put on a linear track with clear rewards along the way. And you say, look, I'm going to get from 0 to 50 on this battle pass in a certain limited time. And when I get there, I'm going to get some awesome reward. Super smart, but it's the same psychology, right? It's just applying the same psychology in a different manner. And when I think of game mechanics, it's all psychology of what are the players' motivations? What do they want to do? And are they an accomplisher? Are they a collector? Are they an omnivore? Or whatever other, kind of archetypes you want to come up with, and then making sure the mechanics meet those needs.
Is there an equivalent right now of a new kind of PM that is still navigating a new space, like cloud streaming or maybe generative AI? Is there someone or some field right now that's kind of there is no expert, but we're kind of learning where the industry is shifting and it is demanding the need for a new breed or a new type of PM?
Well, I think the two you brought up certainly are a new type of PM, and what happens with those, I think, is still to be determined. I think there's obviously new PMs in the Web3 space. It's a different mentality and different thought process. I think metaverse, however you want to define metaverse or what implementation of metaverse, I think there are different thought processes around there too. But I do believe that take out the generative AI for now, but in all the other examples, I think the same mechanics and the same philosophies that we apply to gaming will be applied in those spaces in slightly different ways.
Where do you see us going from here? I feel like a lot of this conversation was building great culture and a great ethic, and also being adaptive and kind of figuring out ways that a company, big or small, can move with the times. like, I feel like you have just this legacy of being able to navigate those waters. Like what is ahead for us in live ops? Like, what's getting you kind of pumped up for the future?
I think for me, it's the kind of the personalization aspect that I was talking to. And I mean, Josh and I talked about, I remember sitting in a conference room with Josh and one of our data scientists, who's still at Zynga. I'm excited. I still work with a lot on this, of personalizing the experience for users. And I think that is the next evolution of live ops. Is it can't be a one size fits all approach for players who've been in the game for many years, and players who are coming in the game, also the different ways that players play the game. And that relates to the content they see, the experience they have. In order for us to really lengthen the lifespan of these players, we have to do something where the game feels special for them, and they're always celebrated, and they don't feel like they're being punished for not playing as much as other people might play or progress. Like it needs to be an experience that really, this is entertainment, right? You should feel good when you play games. And so we have to ensure that the experience we're providing, and that's going to come down to understanding where players are and then tailoring the experiences to meet their needs. And it doesn't sound that exciting, I guess, but it's something that, we've been talking about for 8 to 10 years, and we're starting to get to a place where we can actually deliver that, which is really exciting for me.
I think that's very exciting. I mean, as a player, there's so many games right now that even the amount of stuff that you have to pay attention to and notice, and like the experiences are just so vast that sometimes I wish someone just like know what I've played and better surface, those opportunities to either buy a game, download a game, like even within games, like sub communities of like the Minecrafts or the Roblox, like it's still a little bit draconian the way that you're served up like personalized micro or macro, like big, games. And I think that solving that it feels like we're not there at all yet, given the amount of content available to a player.
No, like I just finished playing God of War. I finished it and I was like, oh my God, what do I play now? And there was no recommendation engine anywhere that told me this is the next game. So I started asking around people at Zynga who I trust, who have similar game tastes, to say like, what's the next game I should play? I agree with you that it's not only in game, but it's also like, what are the other games? And, we'll start to define, I think, high affinity networks. Maybe we do that across game companies. Obviously, Zynga has a wide enough portfolio where we can start to recommend other Zynga games for you. Even it could be console, it could be mobile. Because we can map those affinities. It would be great, if in the long run, we could do that on a broader spectrum. But that does come down, there's some challenges around data and privacy that may become limiters in doing it. It's one thing you can do it in your own network. To do it externally in your own network, it becomes more challenging.
Is there any cardinal sin that it's hard to rewind once a game company or studio starts up? And is there any advice or sage wisdom that you would give to, a new founding team, a new studio?
Yeah, I think I made a game at Zynga, and I was asked to build a game at Zynga, and the premise was we're going to take this very kind of mid-core core concept, and we're going to try to make it more casual, and we're going to try to increase the TAM, right? And we're going to take a core game and make it casual. And it turns out I made a game, but it didn't satisfy the core audience. It didn't satisfy everyone else, right? And so make the game that your core audience wants and then expand from there. Don't try to start with the non-core players and then try to get the core players into it. Understand your core. I think there's many expressions like core and more or whatever, but that's the first, I think, cardinal sin of game development is know who you're making the game for and make sure you 100% satisfy their needs, and then you can expand beyond then. And then the other thing is make sure you have a really clear hypothesis or slant on, are you building this game for monetization or are you building it for retention? And know where you're aiming. My slant is always build for retention first and then you can monetize later. That's not always where new companies are. Sometimes you actually can't afford to wait a year or 2 years for payback on your user acquisition dollars. You need to recoup it in the first 20 days because that's how much money you have. Understandable, but know that you're making that explicit decision and you're trading one off the other because generally speaking, you are. And so if you know that and you're explicit, that's okay. Realize that when you launch the game, it will be imperfect and that you will make it better over time. Games are generally, You can't get every feature you want into a game at launch. Otherwise you will be building the game in perpetuity. And so know what the key features are that you need, be explicit about what you're going to build and how you're going to deliver, and maintain your scope, and then have a roadmap post-launch that you have confidence in. Like a lot of teams launch a game and have no roadmap afterward. You're like, okay, so what's your next feature? And like, we just launched. We don't need it. You should have, a 6 month to a year roadmap post-launch that you already have planned. And know that when you launch the game, things are going to go wrong and you're going to have to like triage for a month, and then you'll get to work on new features. And so be very deliberate about that plan.
I had one last question as well. In the spirit of learning, if somebody wants to get better at live ops, Scotty, what are some resources available to them?
This is how I think I get better at live ops, is by playing a lot of other games. And I know that sounds really simplistic, but there's some games out there that just do an amazing job of live ops and engaging and keeping it fresh and keeping it new. And I will write down kind of the systems and understand and say, why did this motivate me? Like I play probably 10 different mobile games a day. And some I delete immediately, some I, play in perpetuity. I think, understanding the motivations and playing other games and seeing what systems engage you. If they engage you, it's likely they're going to engage other people, right? And I think whether you're a hardcore gamer or you're not, like taking that learning and then saying like, if I were to take this feature and apply it to somebody who doesn't play games, how would I present it to them? How would I tell them there's value to this feature and why should they do it?
I think that's great. Yeah. Like, you mentioned sort of doing deconstructs. I found that, the industry moves so fast. Doing deconstructs of new games that are shipping out is always really helpful. Every decision, everything that you see in a game is a choice made by a group of designers and, PMs and whatever. And so, trying to work backwards and reverse engineer, how did they choose to do X versus Y is always just good hygiene. And
again, don't just play big games. I think, if you play any number of games, you're going to get a lot of ads for other games. Click through, play those games for 5 minutes and see, to your point, why do they make these decisions? Why does this work? Why doesn't it work? Like, hey, there's an event they're running. I don't qualify for the event because I'm a level 2. Why are they showing me the event? Could they have made this event a level 2 event or customized it so that I could play it? What would I, things like that. I think that's where when you start to see how other teams made decisions to understand their consumer or not understand their player, that helps you be better at live ops. Because that's all live ops is keeping your players engaged and understanding what they want and how they want it. And if you can understand that, and that's where I think that was the other, big transition from going from web to mobile. I think as product managers, we didn't focus on our consumers very much when we were on web. We were just data driven, just like optimize. When we got to mobile, we were like, wow, we really have to know our consumers. Like we have to talk to them. We have to do consumer insights. We have to see what they're doing. It's not just data. We have to understand our player and provide that the right. And so there was a huge shift in focus from data, which we still obviously use a ton of, but data to player.
Well, I've certainly learned an incredible wealth of information. And I think the whole ethic of, I loved what you said before about don't do it better until you've proven out the existing model, and don't do new if you haven't done better. I know Josh always kind of has these quotables flying around. I don't know if they're Zynga related or not, like Zynga speed or golden playbook and 80-20-10 kind of stuff. It all feels like it's somewhere in the mix of like the things you can only really learn by doing it so many times, and not always just going like crazy big swings, but trying to learn from what others, like being a student really of the industry and trying to take little breadcrumbs from what you feel is effective for you. And I always say, like, for me as a consumer, live ops almost feel like the drummer of a band, where you don't really notice like a drummer's off, but if it's keeping the rest of the band, on tempo and keeps whatever the song moving, I think it's a very unspoken about kind of area of games that I'm so glad that we were able to steal an hour and a half of your time just to.
No, that's a really good way to think about it. I like the drummer of the band is kind of a good analogy for live ops.
Thank you for the time. I mean, I think we've been recording almost now for an hour and a half, and I'm so thankful that you could have joined both of us.
Well, this was fun.
Yeah. If you want to plug anything else on the slate, I think most pods give you the mic if you have anything to plug. So I feel like I should do the same.
I will plug our games. I think we have a great portfolio of games that I'm really proud of. I will say that 3 of the there are 3 games that I play every day, and they all do happen to be Zynga games. There are 3 other games that I play that are not Zynga games that I play every day, but I am very proud of the games that we've made, and I'm really proud of the fact that we have so many games that are 5+ years old in our portfolio. I think it's a testimony to the teams. So I'm really excited about our current portfolio of games. Obviously, it's a good time to be in mobile gaming.
Thank you so much again, Scott.
Thanks,
Thanks Josh.
Good to see you,
fun.
Josh.
Thanks, Scotty. Yeah, good to see you.